So today I'm continuing the series that I began a long time ago, and as you all, how many of you know how this series got started? Karen, how did it get started?
Typo.
What was the typo?
Blind became later.
Yes, I meant to write Jesus heals the blind, and I came up with Jesus heals the bland. And I got laughing about that to myself and posted it on Facebook and got lots of more suggestions that I could also write. And I've been talking about that now for months. And today's service is God's grace comes to the black, to persons who are black. Monty asked me a question a few weeks ago. He doesn't know I was going to say this. He asked me a question one Sunday before church. He said, "Are you going to talk about politics today?" And what do you think my answer was? Yes, of course I am. And see, I have to talk about politics because politics is about life and faith is about life, and they overlap, and I have to talk about them. Besides, if people are talking about something out in the world and I don't address it, I'm not really doing my job. So do you think I'm going to get political today? Well, it's possible. But let's see what happens. Because what I want to say today is that God's grace is for all people. This was what the Acts reading was about, the long one, that Simon Peter had figured out that it isn't just for people like me. God's grace is for everyone. And that was a surprise to him and a surprise to others, and the first big conflict for the Christian church. So in thinking about this, I have 6 possible sermon topics today. They're all short. One is exceedingly short. I think we can get through them all, but let's start with wherever you like. Where should I begin today?
Possible primitive perspective.
A possible primitive perspective. Now, this is an idea that I think is legitimate, and I think that if you go to places where they study things like this, the scholars will agree with me, but I might be wrong. Carl Jung came up with this idea called racial memory, and he says that all human beings carry the memories of their ancestors. And most of our ancestors were prehistoric times. They, were not modern people by any means. So the things that our ancestors learned are still somehow in our memory, and this explains why you feel like you do when a snake suddenly crawls in front of you. How many of you are creeped out by that? Okay, and the reason that is, Carl Jung says, is because for millions of years, snakes were a serious problem for people. They killed a lot of your ancestors over the years, and that fear of snakes is now embedded somewhere in the primitive part of our brain, and it's never going to go away. Not entirely anyhow. You can overcome it because you can learn, but the fear still sits there. One of the things that I believe happens in the world today is that the darker your skin, the more likely you are to be on the bottom rungs of society. Now, it doesn't take much to look around the United States and see that that's true, that people who are of African descent or others who have darker skin have less opportunity, less privilege, less advantage, more problems, more difficulties, and more poverty than people with lighter skin. And this happens not just in places where there are white and black folks. This happens in other parts of the world too, where whiter folks who are lighter skinned are advantaged over white folks who are darker skinned. And in countries where everyone is black, you will find often that the darker black folks are discriminated against. How many of you have heard about a paper bag church? Do you know what a paper bag church is? Not many. In America, we separated our churches by race, and it still occurs today. But there were black churches that would put a paper bag, a brown paper bag, on their door to show what color your skin had to be allowed into that church. Darker than that, and you were not allowed. Now I got to wondering, why is this everywhere? Why do we have this prejudice everywhere in the world? And I think it's a racial memory. I think it comes from somewhere long ago. What is better for human beings, daylight or nighttime? Where do we function best? In daylight. We have for eons had a preference for what is daylight and a fear of what is darkness. And I think that has evolved in us into our lives today and our society's structures. It's one of the reasons why we do things that we do. And that is the truth according to Stephen. Before you share with anyone else, I'd check it out. Might not be right. Another one. What's to prevent me? It goes like this, Mary. What's to prevent me? Really? Who said it? Not exactly like that. Yeah, I did. That's right. It is this. When the Acts story tells us that Philip, one of Jesus' disciples, is sent out by the Holy Spirit to run down this road in the desert. I always think of on a dark desert highway. But anyhow, he's running down the road in the desert and he comes across a chariot. Yeah, don't finish the song. Come on, get back here. I shouldn't have done that. And now sometime tonight you're going to be sitting there going, on a dark desert. You think, I'm never going to church again. Philip runs to catch up with his chariot, in which he finds a high official of the Ethiopian court who, I guess, had sabbatical or vacation or something and came to Jerusalem for the big festival and is now on his way back. He is one of the high officials that serves Candace, which is the queen of Ethiopia. So we can assume he is Ethiopian, and we can assume, therefore, that he is black. And when it comes right down to it, when he finally hears the message of the gospel, he practically has to dare Philip to baptize him. He practically has to force it. He has to say, look, here's water. What would prevent me from being baptized right now? And what would prevent him from being baptized? Do you suppose there has ever been a church in the United States that refused to do a baptism because of the color of the skin of the parents or the baby? Do you think that has happened? Absolutely that has happened. And I don't know, it can happen in all different kinds of settings, but that question maybe sounds odd to us, for us sitting here in all of our privilege, most of us being white, could be sitting there and thinking to ourselves, why would he have to, force it? Of course, if I said, why can't I get baptized? They would say, well, of course you can get baptized. Because when you live in America, and when you are black in America, you understand that that means things are not going to happen for you that happen for other people. That's the reality. And I don't know if it goes back all the way as far as Philip and the Ethiopian, but I'll bet it does. So his question had merit. He was going to say, are you going to let me do this? Are you going to let me in or not? Yes, we're going to let you in. Don't worry. Are you going to let me in or not is the question. All right, another one.
On the same page with Governor LePage.
Believe it or not, Governor LePage and I have something in common. Now, I want to say it's not what happened this week. I don't know if you're aware of it, but Governor LePage says he wants to start carrying a gun around now. Now, there's a whole lot of other things to say about that, but let me say this. Someone who has rage issues should not be carrying a gun around, right? One of my friends says, well, why not? He shoots himself in the foot all the time. He might as well really do it. Well, maybe so. But that's not the thing we have in common. You know what the thing that Governor LePage and I have in common? He's a... Is he bald? I don't remember. I don't notice things like that, Monty. Guy sitting back there with a full head of hair, giving me a... Governor LePage is a racist. He made that very clear with the statements that he made, right? Governor LePage is a racist, and so am I. There's no getting around this, and so are you. You cannot grow up in the United States of America and not breathe enough racism out of the atmosphere that it doesn't settle into you somewhere and is part of who you are. We hold these truths to be self-evident that Of what? All men? Because we went right on from there to write the Constitution, and who is not equal in the Constitution? Women? And? Black folks. Slaves were only 3/5 of a person when you counted the population. 3/5 of a person. And children. That wasn't in the Constitution, but it was true. And they're still working on that one. You're right. Now, we've gone back and we've amended the Constitution, but the fact is we are not yet living up to what we believe. We believe that all people are created equal, but we are not there yet. There is so much racism in our society, and we are absorbing it. How many of you here today are racist? Better think about it. The first step towards getting beyond racism is to recognize that it's there in you. Great story on Invisibilia, a podcast, Invisibilia, anybody? They're talking about a man who had adopted a white family that had adopted a black daughter, and at one point he was walking along and down the street, and he saw a woman waiting for a bus with a child, and he noticed a black man coming down the street towards her, and he thought to himself, I'm just going to stay here and make sure everything's okay. He thought he was not a racist, but he couldn't get out of his head the idea that Governor LePage has made clear he believes that black men are criminals and criminals are black men. And after all this time, he was so ashamed to realize how much of that was still in him. The first step to getting out of it. There's a UCC church in California that has developed Racists Anonymous for us to sit down. And the first thing you say is, my name is Stephen, and I'm a racist. And that's how we get, thank you, that's how we get past it. What do we got? How many more? 3 more? We can do them all. Like I said, one's wicked short.
Not open for debate, part 1.
What?
Not open for debate, part 1.
Part 1? You want part 1? Here's part 1. Racism is a sin.
Is that the short one?
That's the short one. Wait a minute, am I right?
Yes.
Don't have to say anything more. Not open for debate. Racism is a sin. Okay. All right. Another one. Oh, you want part 2? Last summer, at the end of the summer, I participated in a Black Lives Matter rally. And we met at Samard Payne Park and we marched around the city. And I remember 2 things. I remember 3 things about that. That there was somebody shouting in a megaphone that I had a dialogue with. I can't say it went very well. I also remember that the mosquitoes were particularly heavy that night. And I remember that as we marched along, there were counter-protests. And the counter-protests mostly said the same thing. All lives matter. Now, how many of you have heard that? You've heard Black Lives Matter and you've thought to yourself, all lives matter. Well, let's ask this question. Is it true? Do all lives matter? Yes, of course it's true. We put it in the Constitution, didn't we? In the Declaration of Independence. We believe that. Do we believe that black lives matter? We do not. Because we do not value black people at the same level that we value white people in the United States. And that's the point of those, and I would say it's not open for debate. That's the fact. Nobody disputes the fact that white lives matter, but many people dispute the fact of how much do black people matter really. And that is the question, and that's the essence of part of our racism, and it's not open for debate. That's the way it is in our world. And that creates a problem for us because, number 5, what? What? Okay. What's left? Is that the last one? Yeah. Oh, 1 and 4. Okay. No, we did 4. We did 4. Yeah, okay, yeah, I think this is the last one. So, who's Simon? Simon from Cyrene. Simon is the guy that is compelled to carry Jesus' cross. As Jesus is being crucified, he's already been beaten so badly, he's practically dead already, and they're forcing him to carry his cross to the site of the crucifixion, and he can't do it. He falls, he can't carry it. So the Roman soldiers that are there, whose job is to make sure he gets crucified, grab somebody out of the crowd and plop him down and say, "You carry it." And who did they pick? Simon of Cyrene. And where is Cyrene? No, but you're close. It is in today what would be Tunisia. Simon of Cyrene is African. We don't know that he's black, but we bet that he is because of this. The police got to find somebody to carry this cross, and they look up, and there's this crowd of people staring at him, and who do they grab? Who do they grab? The one with the black face. Grab him. There's no question, there's no surprise that it was Simon. That's the one they grab. But here's the thing. They put Simon on, and Simon carries the cross, and we don't know much about what happens after that, except for this. Later on in the Bible, Simon is mentioned to be the father of two people who were apparently leaders in the early Christian church. Simon of Cyrene happened to be in that spot, got grabbed, and that was no surprise to him. The surprise to him was something happened as he carried that cross, because somehow, being that close to Jesus at that point, God's grace flowed through and into him. And he received God's grace and realized that maybe people were prejudiced against him, but God was not. And Simon Peter, the other Simon in our story, he also stood there one point thinking that God had blessed his people more than anyone else, and finally came to realize that that was not true. And God's grace flowed into Peter's life, and out of Peter's life into the lives of all those foreigners and people of other races whose lives he touched. God's grace flowed like that. And what do you think happened to the Ethiopian when he got back to Ethiopia? Don't know. Here's what we do know. Today, in Ethiopia, there are Christians, Coptic Christians, who are considered to be the oldest continuous community of Christians in the world. How did that happen? How did Christians get so quickly to Ethiopia? How? God's grace came through this man on a chariot on a dark desert highway with a cool wind in his hair. I'm sorry, I'm just making it worse, I know. And if God's grace comes to people who are black or red or white or yellow or any other color, if God's grace comes to people who are green and blue and purple, if God's grace comes to old folks and young folks, if God's grace comes to straight folks and gay folks, if God's grace comes to all of those people that get excluded, then that means God's grace comes to us as well. There is no way, there is no freedom for anybody until there is freedom for everyone. And God's grace does not just come to us, it comes to us. Because when we get right down to it, there is no them. There's only us. Amen? Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, we invite you to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, beginning at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please take a moment to explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day, and that God's blessings will rest upon you now and always. See you next week.